Good afternoon. My name's Charles Brennan. I'm the editor of the International Journal of Food Science and Technology. And with me today for a coffee with the editor are two colleagues and friends of mine from Denmark. Professor Jette Young from Aarhus University and Professor Niall Young also from Aarhus University, but also from IFF being?
Well, it's an acronym for International Flavors and Fragrances, but the company goes by IFF these days.
Excellent, thank you. And here today, we've taken the opportunity of being here at the Randolph Hotel in Oxford and enjoying the hospitality of that hotel. So
absolutely.
It's going to be grand, but really what we want to talk about is your Viewpoint article. And you gave us a Viewpoint article to IJFST in May this year, I think.
Yes.
About hybrid meats and cultivated meats and plant-based products. Really fascinating, and it's already drawn a lot of attention. But where did the idea spark from?
Well, the idea really was sparking from my research area, which is partly meat science and partly human nutrition. And in the meat science area and human nutrition area, I was working with culturing cells as model systems for nutrition and also model systems for how muscle become meat. And in that interspace, then we were thinking of we should really bring the field of cultivated meat to Denmark.
Yeah.
So that's where we started the cultivated meat, and then from then on we could see that the area of cultivated meat has difficulty picking up, and then the hybrid with the cultivated meat and the plant-based really has the potential of making a breakthrough, we believe, because you've got the plant-based that has also a little bit difficulty in the market, and we believe that's probably some of it down to taste, acceptance by the consumer. And if you could add a little bit of taste and nutritional value by mixing it with the cultivated meat, then you would get a better taste. On the other hand, with the cultivated meat, you would lower the price dramatically if you mix it with plant-based. So that's really where I think many of the companies are finding that balance between the cultivated meat and the plant.
Because there's lots of talk in the popular press about cultivated meat, lab-grown meat, and also it's relatively expensive, it has been for a while. Do you view that cost as a stumbling block and also consumer perception of, well, actually it's grown in a lab, so it's not real meat?
Well, I'll argue that it's not grown in the labs because, well, we're investigating it in the labs. It's like doing research on milk. Doesn't come from a lab, but it's investigated in the lab. So it's only at the stage where it's developed and we investigated in the labs. But when it's going to the production, it will be bioreacted, it will be in a production plant. So it's not really lab grown. So we're trying to stick to the term cultivated meat just to make sure that we're talking about the same thing all the time. I'll
stand corrected then, don't worry. But definitions are really important in terms of getting it right and promoting it. And you've already mentioned, Jette, about the taste. Taste from IFF is obviously an issue in terms of flavours, but also the texture. So is there a benefit of having both plant-based foods and cultivated meat products in there as taste and texture for consumers?
I think the challenge that we've got with cultivated meat per se is actually the texture. People expect that you'll be able to cultivate a steak.
Yeah.
Now, I won't say that won't happen, but right now that's not where the science is leading us to believe. You will end up with something that looks like a mince. So from that point of view, how do you make a mince appetizing? And as early as yesterday at lunch in our canteen at IFF, we had a thing called Polish meatballs. Now, I have no idea whether they were Polish or not, but they differed from what I'll call Danish meatballs in as much that they had bits of plant in them.
Yeah.
And you could see it and taste it. And part of that is to get the idea of using the cultured meat into a viable product that is also authentic.
Mm.
So we're stumbling against nomenclature, and we're stumbling against what we call the product that we put the meat into.
Yeah.
And it's far better to try and think about either extending names that people already understand, or calling it something that is not pretending to be something else.
Yeah.
And then when we get into the flavour part of it, there is certainly a role for companies like mine who can actually go in and aid with modulation or actually flavour top notes. It is also a potential that if you need to put proteins into the fermentation mix, that you create a scaffold.
Yes.
Or a structure on which the meat cells that are being cultivated can actually hang on to, because they can't do it themselves.
And would that scaffold help with the texture then, in terms of consumer bite and mouthfeel?
Yeah, exactly. Because when you're cultivating the muscle cells, if you only had the muscle cells and you have like in real life muscle, if you want, that's the membranes that the cells are attached to, and you could actually make it attached also not just to animal-based surface or scaffold, but to a plant-based, and muscle cells, they cannot grow in suspension. There's some that is trying to work, and if they can change the capacity of the cells so they can actually grow in suspension. Some are having some success with that, but normal muscle cells, they don't grow in suspension. They need a scaffold to attach to and to mature on, so they can make these muscle fibers and increase the protein content when they make the muscle fibers. And there's also other nutritional values in it. But I think it's right. There's flavors you can add. As a meat scientist, I would also say that the muscle cells, it does have inherent in the muscle cell the potential to become real meat, so to speak, getting the meat flavors. So we need to treat the muscle cells as if we're hanging the meat. To induce the same biochemical processes. We may get help addition by some of the flavors, but we do also believe that we can actually trigger some of the same.
So a bit of aging, or
exactly aging, like when you take it out of the bioreactor, then mimic a hanging. So that's also part of what we're working with at Aarhus University.
I hadn't thought of that.
So essentially you have to slaughter it.
Yeah, and prepare it and
So as someone more famous than I said, you can have your cake and eat it.
Oh, sounds good.
We can hang our meat and eat it, because it's only during that, what would we call it post-harvest, if you like. But once we've effectively slaughtered the cultivated meat, it then has to go through this aging process that any meat that we normally eat goes through, that actually delivers these kind of meaty flavour components.
So that post-mortem tenderization that would happen in normal meat also helps not only in terms of taste and texture, but also the nutritional compounds. And you've touched on nutrition just briefly.
Yes. I mean, in the muscle cells, what we normally would call tenderization on the carcass, because that's tenderization because we need to make it tender. When we've got the muscle cells and put it on a scaffold, the scaffold that could be plant-based, that's what gives the structure. If we don't have that structure, it will not be a problem in having too tough texture. It would actually be the opposite. So the plant base would actually help giving it some structure. But what we're not certain of, because we don't have many tastings yet or things like that, we could do it at a molecular level, that we can see that the maturation process, we can stimulate the same enzymatic processes as happens when you hang the meat and when flavor are developing. We can see that. It's not published yet, but we've got some results in the lab indicating that. So what you do in the muscle cells is that you basically, that is the precursors that is created in the cells, and then the flavors are being developed when you cook it, basically, when you expose it to high temperatures.
Because that then sparks an idea in my, and you probably already had this idea, so forgive me because I'm just coming from this novelty, but in that scaffold you could have slow release enzymes or slow release flavors coming through, so you could build in that aging flavor texturization process into your product if you wanted to.
Yeah, you could probably help it along, because I guess if we have a limited amount of muscle cells in relation to if we have like a conventional muscle,
Yeah.
if you have like 20% that's plant-based in the scaffold or even more, then I guess you're lacking a little bit of taste because it's not completely the muscle. So maybe there could be something in that. I hadn't thought of that either. So maybe,
Okay.
having this conversation may sort of bring up other ideas. But also when you're talking about the nutrition side, when we are maturing the cells to become muscle fibers, then we increase the protein content. And we also induce genes like the myoglobin, for example, that is iron-carrying protein. And that also then has the potential to add to the nutritional value that we know from conventional meat.
So Niall and Jette, we could yatter on, we could yatter on for a long time about this subject, and we've got the next research project already underlined now.
We do indeed.
But if you were talking about the significance of the paper that you've published to a general public, and you're using the camera, let's say, and you talk directly to the camera about a 2-minute or 5-second sort of snapshot of why that paper is important and where it's going, what would you say?
I think I would say that why it's important is that current statistics tell us that meat consumption is actually not going to go down.
Mm-hmm.
So as we go into 2034, 10 years from now, we can see meat consumption being reasonably stable. And yet we all know that's not good for the climate.
Yeah.
So if we get this right with cultivated meat, we know that on every parameter, apart from energy costs at the moment, then cultivated meat wins on the sustainability side. And that's not to say that we're only going to eat meat. We know that plants and plant-based diets are actively contributing to people's health, but also to climatic change positively. Now, if we can combine those two, then I think we're on a winner.
Sounds good. So I'll put a link into the original paper on the end of this podcast, and you can download that later on. In the meantime, we will continue this discussion. We will continue planning the next research. And thank you very much, Jette and Niall, for joining me for a coffee with me.
Well,
And,
thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.
Indeed.